Hello, everyone. Daniel King here today with Keith Myers, who is an associate professor and director of clinical training at Point Loma Nazarene University. Keith has an extremely varied background in a lot of different elements of the mental health world. So I'm very much looking forward to a wide-ranging conversation with Keith today. Keith, welcome.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I really enjoyed following you along the last few months, and I'm really excited to talk more about it.
Yes, let's dive in. So I know something you're very passionate about is teaching counselors the business side of therapy. Could you speak a little bit to your previous business experience and some of the low-hanging fruit that you've learned from it that other counselors should learn?
Right, absolutely. I think, being both a, licensed professional counselor and also a professor of counseling, I think I've witnessed kind of the two-sided gap in knowledge with clinicians, both on the for-profit side and community mental health clinics, as well as like the nonprofit side. I remember a few years ago, I was consulting in an agency, and I said, one of the first things you need to do is bring in the CFO into the clinical meeting and talk about the gap between revenue and how much it costs to have a clinician on a full-time salary, benefits, 401k match, all the things, right? And how that gap is really significant. And that's why, at the time, the nonprofit, that's why there was, they're targeting millions of dollars of grants so they could kind of fill that gap in between what insurance was bringing and what was actually needed. And I just remember several of the counselors just being like, just kind of stunned deer in the headlights, proverbially, like they're just like, okay, what? I had no idea that, billing $78 an hour for insurance wasn't paying my weight in being here. And so that was like kind of like a shock and awe for me of like, okay, this epiphany of like, there's a real gap here. I think, and then like reflecting on the last several years of teaching counselors in academic programs, noticing that really, we're not really teaching counselors to be business people. We're teaching counselors to be counselors. So it's interpersonal skills, it's theoretical knowledge, it's research, right? It's a lot of the softer side of skills. And so then there's the gap on the academic side because we don't want to necessarily create more coursework and that charges the student more money. And so it's a real paradox sometimes. How do we fill the gap on the academic side? How do we fill the gap on the clinical side of knowledge? And can we start this process earlier, educating clinicians about the business side of therapy?
Is there a case to be made that in this field, because so many folks are either self-employed or owners of small businesses in some way, is there a case to be made that very early on, we should be teaching people at least the basics so that they get exposed to what it's actually like and they can make an intentional decision about, yeah, business ownership is my thing, or hell no, it isn't, and I'm okay with that?
Oh, absolutely. That's where I fall as far as that side of that argument. Like, do we teach earlier, or do we kind of let it play out? I think you got to teach earlier. I think prevention is the best medicine in this context too, where it's like, hey, how do we? I've got a class right now that it's kind of an atypical class called professional community development, and it's all about like the professional side of and the personal side too that kind of integrates together. But one of the things I talk about is here are the 12 lessons I wish I learned in grad school. And a couple of them are how to start a practice and LLC versus S corp and insurance or not insurance, and how to choose a building and how to choose a population and how to market yourself, and how to niche down with professional identity and all the things that really, we start thinking about, okay, how do I market myself as a therapist? It's very different than being a therapist.
And how the two relate, I think, is interesting because there's how you show up clinically, and then there's how you show up on LinkedIn, Facebook, wherever you're doing your marketing. And I think
Mhm.
so many clinicians strike me as such humble, sensitive souls, right? It's all well and good to be with a client in a setting where you can be it's easier to be who you think you are versus who you need to become to do marketing. There is an identity shift for so many clinicians.
That's a great way to say it. And I always tell people, be yourself, be real, be yourself. And also know that, doing the uncomfortable thing, telling that same person you told the other three times about your niche, right? Telling them a fourth time. Sometimes people need to know like 5 or 6 times before they really start to think of you as the expert, right? In this particular area. So I know it feels redundant, and I know it feels like you're just kind of, you know, tooting your own drum, beating your own drum, but like you need to keep beating it because people are not going to make that association without those conversations. Mm.
I think so much of the training, which is very, very deep training, and I'm not a clinician, but I have done sort of executive coach training and practice as a coach, and there are some similarities. There is such a beautiful listening container that you're able to build. And the reality of marketing is you got to talk about yourself. You got to assert yourself. You have to be proud of yourself. And so I think those two trainings can sometimes run contrary to each other.
Absolutely. Like how to be an active listener and then how to be an active promoter are two different, very different things, right? And so if you just listen all day, then you're going to be, you know, broke, basically. Like, you know, because you're not gonna be able to like say, like, hey, here's why clients should consider me. Here's why you should refer to me as another professional in the field, or another colleague in the field, maybe a higher level of care, like in a psychiatric hospital or an intensive outpatient program. You know, how do you get people to refer you on an outpatient level? Yeah, it could be really challenging. It's definitely a shift. So that's one of the things I talk about is like, and then how to talk to clients about money. You know, like clients come in and be like, okay, like you accept insurance, right? And you know, my copay's $20, right? And like, you know, and being able to say like, well, you know, hey, maybe I don't accept that insurance, but here's how I work around that. Here's some accommodations that we have for this and that, and here's how we help you, you know, empower you to be able to maximize some of your insurance, even though it might not be fully available. I'm speaking from a self-pay, you know, more of a self-pay model,
Yeah.
but I've been in the insurance side of it too. And you know, when you have like 85% of your claims get reimbursed, but then you have 15% maybe that aren't being reimbursed, or they develop a snag. Like, who do you have in billing to be able to advocate for that? And if those kind of obstacles can really ruin a small group practice. We talk about 15% of revenue, sometimes it could be more or less than that. I was talking to a colleague recently who had not been paid by a certain payer for like 2 months because they shifted all the way how they pay their clinicians. And if you were on the old paychecks, they shifted to this kind of credit system. Now, you know, you're 2 months behind in your revenue. That creates real hardships for people. And so being able to have people are training to know how to advocate for yourself in those kind of situations is really helpful.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's so much. I mean, each of those alone could be a whole class. So I think clinicians and their boundaries with respect to money is a fascinating subject because clients will test both if you're a practice owner or a clinician at a group practice.
Mm.
Patients will test your boundaries, right, around money.
Yeah,
And it's all well and good to want to serve people, but there's this sort of energetic place you come from where you don't want to serve more than you can serve. And being able to provide for yourself, being able to be financially sustainable is going to give you the energy to serve people so much more effectively, right? But so much of the training is help the world. But of course, if you can't help yourself, you're not going to do much good helping the world.
absolutely. And I think, you know, I think there is a bridge there because we talk so much in our academic training, like, you know yourself and like be self-aware of your own biases and life experiences and traumatic, you know, things that you've lived through. And so how do I, you know, be aware of my family of origin, how that's going to impact me sitting with a client that's dealing with family of origin things, right? And I think there's an opportunity there because we don't talk a lot about the psychology of money. And for so many people, that's a derogatory, shame filled topic that has a lot of emotional weight to it. And so it's easy to just want to avoid it. It's easy to just not want to talk about it. And a client, you know, misses a few sessions and doesn't pay me. Okay, that's okay. They'll pay. You know, and so
Yeah,
it can be really tricky.
it can. It can. I was glancing at Reddit the other day, and I was glancing at a thread where clinicians who either currently work at group practices or are thinking about working at group practices were complaining about owners and how they take too much and how, owners are constantly seeking an unfair deal. And not only did it strike me as very sort of stridently anti-money, anti-capitalist, right? It also struck me as, I'm not sure these people have healed their own relationship with money, right? Nor do they have an appreciation for the burden that a typical practice owner bears. Important, of course, to understand that the typical therapist, is carrying a lot of weight of others, and that's a role we have to respect. But it's important, I think, for clinicians to also appreciate that group practice owners typically bear a burden that they might have a hard time relating to as well, because all of that overhead, both the
Mm.
physical overhead, the non-physical overhead, the energetic weight of running a group practice, typically with no business training, it's a lot, and we have to respect them too.
It's a lot, and I definitely empathize with my colleagues that talk about, the low hanging fruit. I think you said earlier, but like the low hanging fruit of the venture capitalists, experiment that's gone wrong so many times, or there's been publicized, right? Of like, okay, we're coming in, we're making a change, we're adding profits, we're changing things up, we're scaling, etc. And yeah, there's a story there definitely that's been told many times. And also, you don't have to go very far even in a solo practice like I have, like even in a solo practice to know revenue costs, like the time and details and things you have to navigate in a group practice, especially you've got people you're managing, you've got systems you're managing. And guess what? When one person walks out or when one system breaks down, it falls on you, right? Or the operator. So like that is a real stressor and there's got to be compensation for that, right? And then you want to be sustainable and you want to have a profit or depending on how you're structured. But yeah, it's really challenging.
Let's turn to the practice owners. We've been talking a lot about what the clinicians can learn, especially when it comes to business and financial matters. What is most important in your experience for group practice owners to learn? Let's say you have in your class someone who has the chops.
Yeah.
They have the potential to become a pretty good group practice owner. What are the most important lessons, if you could teach them something in advance of actually starting that group practice? What would be important to teach them? Let's say they don't hate money, they've done some of their work there. What else are you going to teach them?
I would say talk to people who've done it. Talk to the clinician who's a practice owner and talk to five of them and get to know their story, get to know some of their early obstacles, get to know some of the early wins and things they watched out for and things they wish they'd have known before they started. Ask really good questions that people who have done it have the hindsight now to be able to like advance, have the benefit from. So I would say like talk to people who are doing it and have done it to get that insider's perspective because otherwise it and a lot of it still is going to be, growth, and a lot of it's gonna be a learning curve, and I'm still learning. I'm still learning how do we navigate these waters of telehealth and VC and all the things that are coming up here. But, yeah, I would say listen and talk to people who have done it, and then a couple of other things I would think is expect it to be really hard for the first year or 2
Yeah.
and expect that you will not get you whatever estimate you set as far as revenue goes, deducted by 15 to 20% because you're going to overinflate that probably. And so you need to like, especially if you're doing payers and insurance, you're going to talk to a few people. You're going to try to get information. And some of that information is elusive,
Yep.
depending on what state you're living in. But like talk to people who are billing insurance and then like, hey, are there anything that they have done strategically to improve their payer reimbursement? If so, that's not the rate you're going to get. You're going to get the bottom of the barrel, right? You're going to get the $70 stigma reimbursement that starts at the beginning, right? Like you're going to get that.
You call it a stigma reimbursement?
Well, I said Cigna, even though well, maybe I shouldn't mention payers on here, but yeah, stigma, Sigma. I guess we could
Yeah,
we
it can be hard to tell the difference sometimes. Yeah.
But I think that's one of the things that I learned with helping a group of investors start up a for-profit clinic a few years back was
Yeah.
they went in with a certain expectation of this is going to be, here's how we're creating our budget and this is going to be the reimbursement. I was like, that's too high. And so it really did affect them the ability to scale the profit level that they were expecting. Yeah.
To the extent that you can share,
Sure.
tell me more about that. How did it go? Were you able to overcome that initial problem?
Yeah, so I was a clinic director at the time, and it was a mall franchise model, and so they were starting a new for-profit clinic, and it was all about 95% insurance based revenue. And some of the original numbers that they had come out and talked to me about was, hey, we're basing it on this average number per session, for reimbursement. And I said, I think that's too high. So that was like I think there was definitely like some influence that was received from that feedback and didn't really see it played out until those claims started coming in later on. In some instances, it took a couple of months to get those first claims coming in. Then once it started coming in, then it started getting more frequent, more regular every couple of weeks. But so I think some of that feedback was received, even though the model wasn't fully changed, and so I knew that could be a roadblock. And so yeah, so it's anytime that you partner, and there were a lot of good things about partnering with these owners, and they were really fabulous as a whole. Like really being able to like listen and really be able to take in, the feedback I was giving them, the clinicians were giving them. But it definitely created an interesting space because you had kind of the clinical side of things, and you had the operational side of things, and you had to, be able to hire the clinicians and so forth and mentor them. So yeah, I think it's definitely doable. I learned a lot of things going through that process that I would do differently now if I was going to, start my own for-profit clinic, for example. But yeah, it could definitely be tricky because there's a lot of nuances
Mm.
that you don't know unless you're in the thick of it.
There are, and it's very natural. Even speaking as an investor, it's very natural for investors to approach mental health like they would other industries. And while every industry is different, some industries are more different than the norm, and this one is more. This one is different.
Well, and you asked me the original question, and maybe I got a little sidetracked, but I think for me, what would be something that I would tell owners is like clinicians are, maybe crudely, as my dad used to say, we're a weird breed of cat. I mean, we are like as a group of people, we are a little unique, and we this is a stereotype, so it's not doesn't it's not true for everybody, but like we tend to over process, we tend to take time to like we tend to move slower, we tend to collaborate really well, we tend to listen really well, and then it's like you need to execute on this tomorrow. It's like that could be a struggle, right? Like executing faster, taking action faster, all those things can be challenging. But a lot of good around like thinking through things strategically, and the experience of the client, the experience of the clinician, all things that are really important to run a really good group practice. So yeah, those are some things that stand out.
I've often thought that the best business partnerships feature a combination of speed and slowness. So, yeah, in business, you ultimately have to execute. You have to do things, but you also have to reflect. So, I am a proud member of Team ADHD, which means I tend to move pretty quickly
Yeah,
and I break things and I can be a bit impulsive. Slowing down is part of my medicine, and I need people around me that are a little bit more cautious and careful. Some of that rubs off on me, and I have, as I've matured as a business person, I hope, or at least hinting in the direction of maturing, I have slowed down a little bit myself, but it's still very helpful to have those guardrails. And this is part of the reason I'm so bullish on clinician, non-clinician partnerships, because that combination of speed and slowness, it kind of reminds me of the Tao Te Ching a little bit, right? It's like a middle way here.
for sure. Well, I appreciate that, and thank you for saying that. I think the last couple of years I've learned to speed things up. For
Mm.
me, it's like, hey, don't let this good idea just fall by the wayside. Let's execute faster. Let's execute 3 months faster than I think I should. And I love that you're slowing down. I love that I'm speeding up, and hey, figuring out together as we go through this thing called growth in life.
Yes. I'm conscious what one other theme I'll throw into the mix for today, and that is veterans. So something near and dear to both of our hearts is work with veterans. And congratulations on getting approved to do that EMDR talk for veterans.
Yeah, appreciate that.
I saw that on LinkedIn. That is super impactful. Can you speak to me about why that's important to you?
A number of years ago, I found myself. I'd been fired from a job. I was looking for work, couldn't find a place to land, and finally, out of the blue, sort of, but not really. But this opportunity came to work with veterans at one of our local hospitals, and I started working there, and I was like, "Wow, this population is like my people," And it was, it's interesting, right? Like this is back in like 2011, 2012, but it's interesting, right? Like as a therapist, we like to tell ourselves like, yeah, I'm self-aware and I understand myself and all these things, know thyself, right? And I was like, why does this resonate so well with me? Like, well, my dad served in World War II, my brother served the Air Force and Navy, right? So there's a lot of military subculture and values and things that I kind of grew up with. And then kind of sitting with clients, it's like, yeah, the personal and professional kind of mixes well here with that, values like selfless service and honor and duty and those kind of things. Like, so, yeah, so that was how I got started seeing veteran clients. And then I've continued that both in my solo practice as well as my research and some of my publications and my writing, my academic teaching.
I think it remains, just given the gravity of the mental health issues they experience, it remains an underserved population in the group practice world, which is unfortunate because group practices to me are the front line of the mental health crisis, right? More than 60% of American mental health patients are going to outpatient group practices. It may not be the sexiest part of the solution, but it is a core part of the solution. And so you look at the gravity of mental health issues that veterans face. I think group practices have to play a bigger role in that journey. So I am a huge advocate of it happening. And yeah, my dad's a veteran as well. So this is near and dear to my heart too. So thank you for advocating that.
You're welcome. That thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, and I think there's a whole like gap in knowledge because and while I haven't served myself, being knowledgeable of like military culture and what that means for people. There's this huge resource called the VA, right? But then there's all these other people that don't feel like connected to that or feel like they're falling through the cracks or disenfranchised. Or what happens when you don't get an honorable discharge from the military? You don't get any access to VA benefits a lot of times speaking. They're trying to change that a little bit. But yeah, so it's really a thing where I'm trying to train and educate people that are in the group practice, the front line, as you say, especially veterans that are disconnected from the VA. How do we teach military culture? How do we teach, what are some of the common clinical issues for veterans, and how do we bridge that? How do we bridge that gap?
Yeah, you're bang on there. Military culture is a distinct thing.
Mhm.
And without feeling some kind of connection to it, without an interest in it, I think it could be a hard population to serve. It's probably part of the reason that group practices are underserving veterans.
I would assume so.
That's a whole podcast in its own right.
It is. Yeah, I'd love to talk more about that one day. Maybe we will.
There you go.
Yeah.
Keith, as we move towards the end of our time together, we've talked about some meaty stuff. I think there are great insights here for the audience on all kinds of business and therapeutic issues. But I'm curious what you do for fun when you're not doing your many. I think you've got about 20 jobs. So when you're not working your 20 jobs, what do you do for fun?
I've only got a few, and one my teaching's my passion. That's my primary. That's my big one. But yeah, no, for fun, I like getting outside. I've got two boys, 9 and 6, so they're always running me, pulling me ahead, running me ragged around. They get so much energy for the entire universe. I like sports. Played when I was younger, and now if I'd play, I'd probably get injured. But I like watching sports now. So Atlanta Braves, Ohio State football, all those things are fun. Yeah, and I enjoy reading for fun too. So my students like, how do you get time to read? And I was like, well, I've read this textbook 3 years ago, so I don't need to read the textbook. Now I can read this novel. See, I can diversify my interests. So yeah, I enjoy reading as well. That's a fun hobby.
What are you reading right now?
Well, it's interesting. I just finished Dave Ramsey's book, Build a Business You Love. That's an interesting one. That was good. And then I finally got around to reading. I've had clients and students tell me that I need to read Tony Robbins' Master the Money Game, and it's an older book, been around a long time. So I just finished that. So I really liked that a lot. That was like, okay, that's opening my mind and like how much I really need to focus on retirement, except for like, okay, I need to kick that into gear an extra notch. So that was really great. So those are two that I just read.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on, Keith. It was a
Sure.
pleasure and look forward to chatting again.
Pleasure as well. Thank you so much, Daniel, for having me.